is the year 1470. Deep within the mountains of Thessaly, a solitary bell tolls its final lament across a valley soon to be silenced, a sound that will never echo there again. Within the stone sanctuary of Saint Catherine's Convent, 23 women kneel, their lips moving in perfect unison, shaping the sacred words that have begun there every morning for years. Yet, on this day, the prayer feels different on their tongues. It tastes like ash, like a final farewell. Beyond the convent's cold stone walls, the horizon is stained a deep crimson, not by the dawn's gentle light, but by the reflection of the banners of an empire that has consumed entire kingdoms. The Ottoman war machine doesn't simply march, it surges forward. An unstoppable torrent of steel and fire, scouring the land clean of all that came before. Inside, Sister Alani, the abbess, grips a silver crucifix, a relic that has been passed down through 3 generations. A tremor runs through her hands, but it is not born of fear. She understands what is at their door. They all do, but what they cannot possibly fathom, what no one could have foreseen, is that a swift end would have been a blessing. For the events that were about to unfold were never recorded in the history books you read in school. This story was deliberately buried, systematically erased, and concealed beneath centuries of enforced silence. What the Ottoman forces did to these women was not a simple act of conquest. It was a cold, calculated strategy, something far more sinister. A truth that modern historians are only just beginning to piece together. So, the question is not whether you are able to face this grim reality. It is whether you are willing to bear witness to a memory that was meant to be forgotten. If you've ever questioned why some stories are lost to time, while others are endlessly repeated, then you have found the right channel. Here, at Herodotus Historians, we excavate the archives that the world has chosen to forget. We delve into missionary correspondences, official Ottoman state records, and personal testimonies buried deep within Vatican vaults. Every single view, every like, and every subscription empowers us to rescue one more voice from the abyss of history. Now let us return to that convent in Thessaly, for the bell has fallen silent, and the splintering of what heralds the breaking of their doors. To truly grasp what befell these nuns, you must first understand the imperial machine that was designed to consume them. 17 years prior, in the year 1453, the city of Constantinople had fallen. The crown jewel of Christendom, a city that had endured for more than 1,000 years, was extinguished in just 53 days of relentless cannon fire and bloodshed. The Hagia Sophia, once the grandest cathedral in all the world, was systematically stripped of its sacred crosses. Mere hours after the city fell, its priceless mosaics were concealed beneath layers of plaster, its great bells melted down for war. In less than a week, the Islamic call to prayer echoed from the very domes that had resonated with Christian hymns for 900 years. It was there that Sultan Mehmed II stood in the great nave of that ancient church and proclaimed it a mosque. This was not an act of piety, for he had no shortage of places to worship. It was an act of power because he understood a fundamental truth that most conquerors miss. You do not truly vanquish a people by ending their lives. You vanquish them by methodically erasing their very identity, by wiping away the memory of who they once were. The Ottomans were not merely conquering territory, they were conquering history itself. And as Mehmed cast his gaze west toward the scattered remnants of the Byzantine Empire, he did not see ruins. He saw open wounds that refused to close. Every church bell that dared to ring, every monastery that remained standing, every cross that cast its shadow upon his conquered soil, these were not relics. They were declarations of defiance, tangible proof that the old world stubbornly refused to die. And each nun who continued to pray in her ancient tongue was a living testament to the idea that faith could indeed outlast armies. And so, the Sultan made a fateful decision. If these pockets of faith would not convert, then they would simply be made to disappear. But not through a straightforward massacre. A massacre creates martyrs, and martyrs have a way of inspiring resistance. Their stories are told, songs are written in their honor, and the dead achieve a kind of immortality. No, the Ottomans had devised a far more sophisticated method, a solution that was designed to leave no trace. No songs, no stories, no memory. A complete erasure. By the year 1470, this insidious strategy had been perfected across the empire, silencing Greek monasteries, Serbian convents throughout the Balkans, and Armenian churches deep within Anatolia. Their method was not always fire they converted. Some, and left others to crumble into dust. Yet the pattern remained chillingly consistent. First, the offer, then the silence. The convent of Saint Catherine, perched on a remote hillside in Thessaly, far from any garrison or ally, was poised to become just another test case, a mere footnote in the relentless march of an empire's expansion. But these women had no idea they were footnotes. These were not warriors. They were women who had dedicated their entire lives to the quiet realms of silence and prayer. Their only weapons were rosaries. Their only armor was an unyielding faith. Most of them had never laid eyes on a soldier, never felt the cold weight of a blade, nor ever imagined they would need to. Sister Llewellyn had guided this convent as its abbess for 12 long years. Before that, she tended to the sick in a village that no longer existed, a place swallowed whole by the plague in 1448. She came to this convent not to escape the world, but to find some meaning within it. Sister Magdalena was only 19. She had taken her sacred vows just 2 years before. Her hands still bore the hard-won calluses from her father's farm. She sought sanctuary here after her entire family was lost in a raid. This convent was the only place she had felt safe since. Sister Theodorus was 70. She had outlived 2 abbesses, an emperor, and more wars than she could possibly recount. The fear of death had left her decades ago, but none of them had ever faced a trial like this. If this singular moment in history doesn't compel you to learn more, you might be missing the very lesson our ancestors paid the ultimate price to teach, that the most defiant act you can commit in the face of absolute power is to refuse to forget who you are. Now, let us bear witness to what happens when unshakable faith collides with an unstoppable empire. The first cannonball strikes just after dawn. It does not hit the chapel. It strikes the bell tower. The sound is apocalyptic. Stone erupts into the air. Iron screams against iron. The ancient bell that had rung out every single morning for 140 years shatters in mid-swing, its fragments raining down onto the courtyard where the sisters cultivated their healing herbs. The very same hands that tended those fragile plants now cover their ears, trembling. Sister Llewellyn does not scream. She stands resolute, crucifix raised high against the smoke-filled sky, and begins to sing. The Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. One by one, the others join her. 23 voices rising in fragile defiance against the roar of an empire. But empires have no ears for songs. By midday, the gates are shattered. Ottoman soldiers flood the courtyard, not with their swords drawn for the kill, but with ledgers, quills, and inkpots. They move through the hallowed halls like clerks, not conquerors, counting, recording, and cataloging. Because in the eyes of the Ottomans, these women are not people, they are assets to be processed. A translator steps forward. A Greek man, one who once called these hills his home. His voice trembles as he reads from a scroll, and you can hear the profound shame buried in every single word. By order of Sultan Mehmed II, all subjects of the conquered territories must submit to the authority of the Sublime Porte. Those who convert will be granted protection. Those who refuse will face the full consequences of rebellion. Sister Llewellyn steps forward. Her face is a mask of calm, almost serene. She speaks not to the soldiers, but directly to the translator, in a Greek so pure and clear that every soul present understands her. Tell your sultan that we have already given our lives to a higher king. We have nothing left to surrender. The officer in charge, the man in command, was Hassan Pasha, a name etched into the annals of Ottoman military history from the brutal Thessalian campaign of the 1470s. He offered no outburst of rage, but rather something far more unnerving, a slow, knowing smile, for he understood a truth they had yet to grasp. His empire had not just mastered conquest, it had perfected the insidious art of dismantling the human spirit, leaving the body intact. That evening, their sacred chapel became their prison, where they were left with no food, no water, only suffocating darkness and the sounds of soldiers outside. The guards' laughter and feasting served as a constant, brutal reminder of the life being denied to them in this cruel wager to see whose will would crumble first. In a darkened corner, two young novices from Corinth finally broke, their quiet despair echoing against the cold, unfeeling stone. But then Sister Magdalena, a woman of barely 20 years, began to speak. She whispered a psalm, her voice a fragile thread in the gloom. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Then she began another. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." As the ancient words filled the space, the sounds of weeping slowly subsided. This was their adversaries' first miscalculation. They had profoundly underestimated these women, whose entire existence was a preparation for hardship, forged through fasting and sleepless vigils. Through the biting cold, hours of silence, and the discipline of submission to a power greater than any earthly empire, they had been honed. What the soldiers saw as a method of torment, the nuns recognized as a mere extension of their daily spiritual practice. But Hassan Pasha was a patient man who had seen this defiance before in Maria, in Wallachia. He had seen it amidst the smoldering ruins of Serbian monasteries, where monks believed their faith alone was a shield. Faith, he believed, was like a flame. "It is like a candle," he once wrote in a letter to the Sultan, a document still held in the Topkapi Palace archives. "It burns brightest just before it is extinguished." He was now poised to test that very theory. On the dawn of the second day, the heavy chapel doors groaned open, and a servant entered bearing bread and water. He placed the simple sustenance on the floor in absolute silence and departed, leaving the women to stare at it, their throats parched and their bodies aching. Their stomachs gnawed with a profound emptiness. The younger novices turned to Sister Eleni, their faces etched with a desperate plea, but it was Sister Theodora, the eldest, who spoke. "They offer this to make us grateful," she warned, her voice frail but firm, "to soften our resolve." Eleni gave a single, resolute nod. "Then our fast continues." Not a single hand reached for the offering. By the third day, the physical toll was severe. Their lips were cracked and bleeding, and a tremor ran through their weakened hands. The youngest of the sisters could scarcely find the strength to stand, yet their spirits remained unbroken. From the courtyard, Hassan Pasha observed, his arms folded across his chest, both impressed and frustrated. For a fleeting moment, a grudging respect might have touched his hardened expression, but such a sentiment was a luxury that would never alter his strategy. As the third day waned, the doors swung open once more. This time, no servant entered. It was Hassan Pasha himself. He spoke in his native Turkish, his words echoed by a translator who trailed him like a phantom. "You are not criminals," he began, his tone deceptively mild. "You are not our enemies. You are merely misguided. The Sultan, in his mercy, offers you new lives, new names, and the shield of his protection. The price is but a few simple words." His offer of erasure was met with a profound, unyielding silence. "Or," he continued, "you can journey with us to Constantinople, where the Sultan himself will pass judgment." Perhaps your conviction will move him. You let the sliver of false hope hang in the air. But be warned, the road is arduous, and it does not suffer the weak to survive it. This was not a threat, but a statement of indisputable fact. Sister Elene's gaze swept over her flock. She saw figures slumped in near unconsciousness, lips moving in silent prayer, eyes fixed on the cold stone as if seeking strength from the very foundation of their home. Her eyes then met Hassan's, clear and unwavering. "We will walk." The chilling smile returned to his lips. "Good." We depart at dawn. In their final night within those walls, the women huddled together, drawing courage from each other. Words failed them until Sister Magdalena's voice rose, not in a psalm, but in a hymn. It was an ancient melody from evening prayers, and one by one, other voices, cracked and weak, joined hers, weaving a chorus of defiance that drifted out into the night, momentarily silencing the soldiers outside. Some avert their gaze. One, many years from now, will recount to his grandson the tale of the women whose final act was a song of defiance. Yet, even that memory is destined to fade into silence. For now, their hymn escapes through the fractured chapel walls, a sacred melody carried on the wind, out into the enveloping darkness. It is at once a prayer, a desperate plea, and a defiant declaration. We remain. Their forced march begins at dawn on the fourth day. 23 women, their hands cinched by coarse rope, are herded south towards the sea. They have no carts, no horses, only the punishing earth beneath their feet and the swirling dust, and a sun that offers no quarter. Their captors feel no need to hasten the pace. Why would they? The journey itself is the instrument of their torment. By the second day, Sister Irene succumbs. At 62 years of age, with knees that have long betrayed her, she falls. She struggles to rise, but her limbs refuse to obey. The soldiers offer no pause. Instead, Sister Magdalena and another, Sister Anna, hoist her up, bearing her weight between them for another 3 miles. When the day's march finally ceases, Irene has slipped into unconsciousness. By morning's light, she has passed. They lay her to rest by the roadside, digging into the earth with their bare hands. There are no tools, no rites, only handfuls of dirt and hushed prayers. The soldiers observe, indifferent, not intervening. Hassan Pasha coldly updates his ledger. 22 remain. Then, on the fourth day, the grim pattern repeats. Sister Callista, silent since the horrors of the siege, halts her march. She simply sits down upon the ground, in the center of the road, closes her eyes, and refuses to move. She is left behind. By the time the survivors reach the port of Volos, 7 days after they began, their number has dwindled to 18. Yet, something unforeseen transpired on that brutal march, a change their captors never anticipated. The women's tears ceased, their pleas fell silent. They walked on in a profound quiet. But this was not the silence of submission. It was the stillness of women who had made a final, internal choice. At the head of this solemn procession walked Sister Eleni, leading them even in chains. But on the morning of the 7th day, Hassan Pasha summons her. She is taken to his tent, alone. The official Ottoman chronicles are silent on what transpired. Our knowledge comes from another source. A letter penned by a Venetian merchant who saw what followed. A document unearthed in the year 2003, hidden within the archives of Dubrovnik. He wrote, "I watched as they returned her at dawn. She can no longer walk on her own. Her eyes, may God forgive me for what I saw in them. Her eyes were open, but the light within her was gone. They clothed her in silk and paraded her through the camp, a supposed trophy of conversion. But as I drew near, I saw her lips move. She was reciting her prayers in Latin, a silent rebellion. She had not yielded. She was not broken. They had merely claimed her physical form, leaving her spirit to drift in a place they could not reach. This reveals an imperial tactic that conventional history often overlooks. They understood that creating martyrs was a mistake. Martyrs fuel resistance. Their stories become songs, their legends are told, and the dead are elevated to sainthood. No, they want to create ghosts. Women who would exist walking, eating, breathing, but whose spirits are shattered, never to be whole again. They were to be living proof. That defiance was meaningless. They were to be walking warnings to any soul who dared believe their faith could withstand the might of an empire. Sister Eleni completed the journey to the coast with the others. But from that day forward, she never uttered another word. Her gaze never met another's. She was a physical presence, but her essence was gone. The sight of her made the younger sisters weep, while the older ones simply deepened their prayers. Upon reaching the port of Volos, they are forced aboard a galley, a massive warship lined with rows of benches, with chains bolted fast to the timbers. This is no vessel for passengers, it is an instrument of subjugation, built to transport slaves, prisoners, and cargo. The nuns are now shackled. To the benches, their wrists clamped in iron rings. The proof of this is found in a ship's manifest, discovered in 1987 within Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. The museum archives list them not by name, but by number: religious captives, female, aged 18, destined for the imperial household. Their purpose was listed as domestic service, and conversion a chilling euphemism for what awaited them. For 12 agonizing days, the sea was their tormentor. Vicious storms battered the deck as the biting salt spray seared their chapped lips. The ship heaved and plunged, a relentless torture for the women who, having never known the ocean, were racked with sickness until nothing remained. In the dead of night, the youngest, Sister Magdalena, would whisper psalms under her breath, her voice a fragile thread against the roar of the waves. But the other prisoners, Greeks, Serbs, Italians, men and women chained alongside them, strained to listen. For a brief, sacred moment, even the tempestuous sea seemed to fall silent. When their vessel finally entered the Bosphorus, the sisters beheld the skyline of Constantinople rising before them like a specter, a panorama of domes, minarets, and walls that seemed to stretch into eternity. The city gleamed in the dawn light like a freshly honed blade. For centuries, it had been coveted as the city of the world's desire for them. It would be a magnificent cage. From the docks, their march began, a grim procession through narrow streets crowded with merchants, soldiers, and other slaves. People stopped and stared. Christian nuns were an extraordinary sight among the captives, a profound curiosity even for an empire built on conquest. They were led past the ancient walls, through the heart of the imperial district, past gardens where fountains sang and peacocks shrieked, and then into the immense shadow of Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral of their faith now repurposed as a mosque. There, they were forced to their knees. As the call to prayer echoed from the minarets, one of the sisters murmured a devastating truth. We are home, but it is no longer ours. They were escorted to the palace, yet not to its gilded halls, nor to the courtyards where ambassadors strolled and viziers conspired. They were taken deep beneath, down stone steps that spiraled into blackness. Through tunnels reeking of damp and decay, they were led to a place that, officially, did not exist. If you're still watching, it is because a part of you knows this story demands to be told. Subscribe to Crimson Historians. Not for us, but for them, for the voices that were swallowed by the abyss of silence. Now, let's follow them into that darkness. Beneath Topkapi Palace lies a hidden network of tunnels that no tourist ever sees. Storage chambers, servants' quarters, and forgotten passages winding through the bedrock like dark veins. And in the farthest recess, sealed off for centuries, was a room with no recorded purpose. In the year 2011, during restoration work, archaeologists broke through a false wall. What they discovered stopped them cold. Scratched into the stone, barely discernible, were crosses, dozens of them, small and crude, etched with fingernails or shards of pottery. And beneath, those crosses inscribed in Latin were four powerful words: Lux in Tenebris Lucet. The light shines in the darkness. This was their secret chapel. For months, perhaps years, these women existed in the shadows of the palace, toiling as silent servants by day, scrubbing floors, washing linens, and tending fires in rooms they could never inhabit. But at night, when the palace slept, they would steal away to this forgotten chamber and pray. They had no priest, no altar, no Bible, only their memory. They recited psalms from recollection, fragmented verses woven into desperate prayers that sustained their very souls. They sang hymns in whispers so faint the stones themselves seemed to strain to hear. They held communion with bread purloined from the kitchens and water drawn from the palace wells. And they carved their faith into the cold stone, one defiant scratch at a time, certain no one would ever see it. Sister Magdalena was counted among them, the young woman who had murmured psalms on the ship, who had borne the weight of Sister Irene. On the arduous road, the one who refused to avert her gaze when they presented Sister Alani, shrouded in silk. She became their defiant voice in the encroaching darkness. Archaeologists later discovered her own mark, a small bird etched into a corner of the wall. Alongside it, 23 lines, one representing each sister, yet only 11 of those lines were fully carved. The others trailed away into nothingness. They repurposed broken pottery as candle holders, a mere scrap of linen for their altar cloth. From a single shard of shattered mirror, they fashioned a defiant, crude cross. In this secret chapel, they would gather each night after the palace descended into slumber. There were no hymns, no sermons, only whispers. Each woman would kneel, sharing a precious memory. Her home, the chime of her church bell, the scent of bread baking before dawn. These memories became their new psalms, small, sacred offerings to a God they trusted still listened in the dark. A Venetian prisoner held within the palace for ransom in the year 1478 wrote of strange, echoing voices from beneath the harem of women singing in Latin too. A God that was not of their empire. For centuries, historians dismissed his account as mere superstition until they finally uncovered the chapel. But here is where the narrative shatters your heart. The crosses stop. Halfway across the wall, the etchings become erratic, desperate. The lines gouge deeper, as if carved with a final, frantic force, a desperate urgency. And then there is nothing. Ottoman records from 1482 mention a reorganization of the palace staff under the new sultan. Anyone who was deemed unproductive or showed resistance was simply removed. There are no details, no names recorded, no final resting places, just a single, chilling line in a ledger, penned in neat Ottoman script, dealt with. The nuns of Saint Catherine were thus erased from history. 18 women who had walked for 7 days through a living hell, who had crossed an ocean in chains, who had carved their faith into stone in absolute darkness, were gone. But their chapel remained. A French diplomat in 1712 wrote of a lingering rumor among the older palace servants that on certain nights, if you stood in the lower halls, the very air would grow profoundly cold, and if you listened with intent, you could hear the faint sound of women singing in Latin. He dismissed it as pure superstition, the foolish folklore of uneducated servants. But stone walls do not lie. In 2011, when archaeologists examined the chapel with modern scrutiny, they discovered something else. Traces of wax, not from Ottoman candles, but from a different, older source. A compound mixed with herbs, the specific kind of candles nuns would have made in their own convents. This meant they had kept their vigil for far longer than anyone had ever conceived. For months, perhaps even years, they continued carving crosses, whispering prayers, and refusing to be extinguished. Sister Magdalena's small bird was the final etching on that wall, and beside it, scratched so faintly it almost escapes the eye, were two words in Greek: we endure. But the truth is, they did so much more than just endure. They left behind a testament that empires could never fully erase. A room filled with crosses, a prayer immortalized in stone. Tangible proof that faith could survive where walls and chains ultimately fail. The Ottoman Empire would last until 1922, a sprawling 600 years of conquest and power. But in the end, it was those defiant scratches on a hidden wall that outlasted it all. Not the Sultan's powerful decrees, not Hassan Pasha's meticulous ledgers, not the fine silk they used to dress Sister Alani in. Just four Latin words, carved by women the world was forced to forget. Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness. So, why does this story truly matter? Because it transcends religion. It is not even truly about the Ottomans. It is about what the human spirit does when power tries to break it. The attempt to erase a people, and the story of what happens when those people refuse to vanish. The Ottoman Empire endured for 600 years. They conquered across 3 continents. They redrew maps, silenced languages, and remade entire cultures. They repurposed the greatest cathedral in Christendom into a mosque. Their dominion stretched from the very gates of Vienna to the vast Arabian deserts. But they could not extinguish the memory of 18 women who etched their prayers into cold stone. Consider that for a moment. A colossal empire with armies, cannons, and limitless resources driven by the will to remake the world, pitted against women armed with nothing more than their fingernails and their faith. And in the end, those women won not by the standards that empires used to measure victory. They never reclaimed their convent, nor did they convert their captors. They did not survive to witness their own freedom, but they left something indelible behind. It is said that history is written by the victors, but memory is preserved by the survivors. And sometimes, survival takes the form of a cross, carved in utter darkness where no eyes were meant to see it. It is a prayer whispered in a tongue the conquerors sought to obliterate. It is a bird scratched into the stone, a memorial for the sisters who were lost. Centuries later, against all odds, we found it. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once observed, "Life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards." These women lived their lives forward, marching directly into the abyss. They walked for 7 days, fully aware they might not survive the journey. They crossed the sea bound in chains, knowing precisely what awaited them on the other shore. They were led down into tunnels deep beneath a palace, certain they might never feel the warmth of the sun again. Yet they carved their prayers regardless, holding on to a belief that someone, someday, would look back through time and find their message. You just have. In the year 2011, as archaeologists stood within that concealed chapel, gazing at those crudely carved crosses, one posed a question that still haunts me today. How long did they maintain this vigil? Traces of wax point to a period spanning years. The sheer depth of some carvings speaks of a desperate, relentless effort. This implies that these women assembled, night after grueling night, year after hopeless year, in pitch-black darkness, and stubbornly refused to abandon their belief. Even as their sisters vanished one by one, even as the number of scratches on the wall ceased to grow, even when all hope should have logically expired, they continued to carve. That is not merely faith, that is defiance in its most unadulterated form. The Ottoman Empire is no more, having dissolved in 1922. Its powerful sultans are dust, its vast armies but a memory. The palace itself still stands, but only as a museum. Tourists now wander its halls, snapping photographs, completely oblivious to the profound history that lies just beneath their feet. But those crosses, they remain. And that single Latin phrase, faintly visible after 500 years, still speaks volumes. Lux in Tenebris Lucet. The light shines in the darkness. It is a line taken from the Gospel of John, a verse about a light that can never be extinguished, about a truth that endures even when all else has been stripped away. Sister Magdalena etched those words, knowing full well she would never leave the confines of that palace, knowing her own name would be lost to time, and knowing the world outside would continue on without her. Yet she carved them anyway, because she grasped a fundamental truth that empires never seem to learn. You can seize territory. You can rewrite the annals of history. You can strike names from official records and conceal bodies in unmarked graves. But you can never extinguish the spirit people carry within their hearts. And you can never truly silence what they choose to carve into stone. You have just borne witness to one of history's most profound and somber truths. If tales like this one serve as a stark reminder of humanity's fragility and how easily voices can be silenced, then I urge you to subscribe to Crimson Historians and join us in keeping the past alive, because some voices demand to be heard, even if they were suppressed for centuries, especially in those times. The nuns of Saint Catherine were condemned to oblivion. That was the imperial design, to erase their existence, to break their will, reducing them to spectral memories, new followers of the faith, or insignificant entries in the ledgers of the empire. But they defied that fate. Their legacy remains, found in those defiant crosses, in that sacred Latin phrase within the chapel walls, uncovered by archaeologists a full 500 years later. And now, their spirit is here with you, because you have heard their echo, because you have chosen to remember, because you have denied their oppressors the final victory of silence. Lux in Tenebris Lucet. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not conquered it.